Cheryl Jenkins.
George Campbell. I should have known it was you.
The holiday season was upon us, and I was finally heading home. My parents had downsized, trading their sprawling house for a cramped townhouse. My name is Sheryl, and this is my love story. As my sister and I wandered through the town square to the Christmas carnival, taking in the festive decorations, I couldn't help but notice the town's new mayor, the handsome, charismatic Terrence, my high school crush. But before I could get a good look, a clumsy figure barreled into us with a Christmas tree. It was George, my high school rival. We were like oil and water, always had a tumultuous relationship. He was a science teacher at our junior high school and also volunteered with the science club. Suddenly, a magical carousel appeared out of thin air. As I took a spin, the world around me shifted. My sister was wearing a different coat. Then I ran into Terrence, the newly elected mayor who insisted he was running for city council, but also seemed to think we had a dinner date planned. As I could recall, our one and only date ended in a spectacular disaster 5 years ago. Then I noticed a poster dated back to 2015, 5 years ago. Then I bumped into George. I showed him the poster, but he didn't seem to notice anything amiss. The chaos around me was overwhelming. Confusion swirled as I struggled to make sense of it all. And then I saw her, Miss Nelson, my beloved high school science teacher and neighbor who had recently passed away. The sight of her sent a shockwave through me, and I fainted. I regained consciousness in the sickbay, where George was waiting. He explained that I had fainted and he brought me there. I confided in him about seeing Miss Nelson and the inconsistencies in the poster's date. I also shared my growing suspicion that I might have traveled back in time 5 years after the carousel ride. I made him promise not to laugh, but as soon as I finished, he couldn't contain himself. As usual, he was being his annoying self. Then I got up to go search for the carousel, but he insisted he was a volunteer and there was no carousel at the carnival that year. He blamed my confusion on too much eggnog or exhaustion and insisted on taking me home. I needed some alone time to clear my head, so I declined his offer and decided to walk home. I arrived at my parents' new townhouse, only to find it occupied by a stranger. Confused and disoriented, I headed to our old home, where my parents were still living, seemingly. Overwhelmed by the surreal situation, I decided to visit Miss Nelson, my beloved high school science teacher. To my astonishment, she was alive and well, despite having recently passed away. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. I had somehow traveled back in time, 5 years. I realized that this time travel wasn't just a bizarre anomaly. It was an opportunity. I could use my knowledge of the future to prevent mistakes, to make things right. I started small, offering advice to friends and family, guiding them towards better choices. I visited Miss Nelson at my old high school and learned that George was now the after-school science club teacher. It was heartwarming to see him inspiring the next generation of scientists. Miss Nelson and I stopped by to say hello, and I even had the chance to address the class. George and I couldn't resist our competitive spirit, and our friendly rivalry continued. Then Miss Nelson suggested that I assist George with teaching the science club to give her more free time during the Christmas season. Though neither George nor I were initially enthusiastic about the idea, we agreed to work together. George invited me to run errands with him. While he didn't believe my wild time travel tale, he couldn't help but ask about my future self and my plans. I shared my plans to spend more time with Miss Nelson and help my sister with her career and mentioned my upcoming date with Terrence, my high school crush. I confessed my long-held feelings for Terrence, and George, ever the humorist, couldn't resist a laugh. That was one of the things I liked most about him, his ability to make me smile, even in the most bizarre of circumstances. My first day teaching the science club was a complete disaster. I struggled to engage the students, and the lessons felt flat and uninspiring. Later that day, I asked George to join me in picking out a Christmas tree for Miss Nelson. Still skeptical about my time travel claim, he challenged me to provide proof. I told him about the unexpected snowfall that happened that week that had closed the main road between our town and another. He told me the forecast had predicted clear skies for the week. As we discussed our high school past, a sudden gust of wind swept through, and we both found ourselves tumbling into a snowbank. The next science club class, I decided to take a different approach. I planned a field trip to the local carnival where we could explore the science behind the rides. The trip was a huge success, and the students were engaged and excited. After class, George and I wandered around the carnival. He admitted that our friendly competition had pushed us both to be our best, and that he chose me to compete with because I was the best. We even challenged each other to a carnival game, enjoying a moment of friendly rivalry. Later that night, I went on a date with Terrence, my high school crush. It was a disaster. He was obsessed with politics, constantly talking about his plans to become mayor. I realized we had nothing in common. After the date with Terrence, I turned to George for comfort, who I bumped into. He asked about my date with Terrence, and I told him it was a complete disaster. We talked a bit before I headed home. The next day, I went to a job interview with the intention of sabotaging it. I didn't want to leave my hometown, especially not for a job that I knew would take me away from the things I loved. After the interview, I met with George, who was struggling to find the perfect Christmas gift for Miss Nelson. I began to see George in a new light. A spark ignited between us, a connection I hadn't noticed before. We confessed our mutual longing for each other's company since my departure. As if fate was conspiring with us, the weather took a dramatic turn, and snow began to fall. Perhaps, just perhaps, George would finally believe my time travel tale. We had a Christmas party for the last day at school, then George helped me decorate Miss Nelson's Christmas tree. George and I hung out afterwards, and I realized I had been wrong about him all along. There was an undeniable spark between us. As our conversation deepened, a moment of intimacy hung in the air. But just as our lips were about to touch, my phone rang, shattering the moment. Then, I told George I decided to go to DC. I wanted to stay in town with him, but I also knew that the work to be done in DC was important. It was a tough decision. He wasn't happy. It's the last night of the carnival. In a moment of impulsiveness, I rushed to find George. I wanted to tell him how I felt, but as I approached him, I saw the magical carousel. Without thinking, I jumped on and the world began to spin. I yelled out to George, "I think I'm falling in love with you." When I opened my eyes, I was back in 2020. I was relieved to be home, but a part of me yearned for the life I had left behind. One night, as I was stargazing, as if on cue, George appeared beside me. He had been waiting for me, patiently. He held out my scarf, a relic from 5 years ago, a testament to his enduring feelings. He confessed that he had heard my declaration of love and that he too was falling for me. In that moment, I knew that I had found my true north. As we shared a kiss, I realized that the greatest adventure was yet to come. The next night, I received some wonderful news. My new job would allow me to work from home. To celebrate, George and I spent the final extended night of the carnival together, enjoying each other's company.